how many crimes, how many criminals are walking the streets committing new crimes because they can.
We first brought you this upsetting story last week. A young woman found dead in her Michigan home, and it seems the investigation may be at a standstill. Today, we're speaking with Megan Drumhiller's parents about their push for justice in their daughter's murder case. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. We have a special follow-up for you on this case of 31-year-old Megan Drumhiller. This happened 2 years ago on January 28th, 2022. Drumhiller was found dead in her home in Carroll Township, Michigan. She had just come back from an extended vacation with her family, and she ends up dead, asphyxiated to death. Now, her mom at the time couldn't get a hold of her, so her apparent on-again, off-again boyfriend went to the house and found her, calling 911. Law enforcement has classified this as a homicide, and after some alleged mishaps during the investigation, which we talked to you about in our previous episode of Sidebar, it is a question of where are we exactly in finding Drumhiller's killer? So with all of that in mind, I want to bring on two special guests. I'm joined by Lynette and Tim Drumhiller, Megan's parents, who are offering a $100,000 reward for any information that leads to an arrest in Megan's case. I want to thank you both so much for coming on. I mentioned to you before we started. I'm just going to say it again. I am so sorry for what you're going through. I'm so sorry for your loss. It seems unimaginable what you and the family are going through right now, but to take the time to come on and talk about the case, we really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
How are you both doing? Let's just start there.
Well, boy, that's a loaded question. It's extremely difficult, and I think what I've said all along is we're having to deal with the loss of one of our children and the twists and turns of the investigation, and sometimes we get thrown into different situations, and that's been by far the most difficult part of it. It's kind of hijacked our normal grieving that I suspect other people go through when they lose people through less traumatic situations.
Right. It's hard to just focus on the spirit that she was and think about the happy memories without all of this mess interfering. And we have taken some time where we go away for a few days and just try to focus on Megan or look at pictures. And, ironically, some of the times that I can remember her best are in my dreams. They're so real, and I can hear her voice, and we're having a wonderful time. And then you wake up, and reality hits.
Yeah, and that's actually where I wanted to start, Lynette and Tim. What was Megan like? We talk about the case so much. Let's just talk about her for a minute.
Yeah, she was a spirited, charismatic, bright, happy, sunny child. Very creative. She had a lot of talents, quick learner. She was speaking in full sentences by the time she was one, for instance, and she was a wonderful artist. She could sing. She was a talented dancer of 20-some years. She danced her entire life, but yet she could be very shy. She relied on her brothers a lot as a child. Hey, Logan, come with me to do this or that. She might perform in front of tens of thousands of people, but she didn't like crowds. She was very loyal to her small group of friends. And I would say she struggled with change. She'd have to force herself to make change, even though sometimes she knew it was good for her, but she would always kind of fall back on the same loyal friends and be dependent very much on her family for, I would say, confidence and comfort.
I think each one of us had our own kind of special relationship with her. Lynette passed on her love of reading to Megan, and I've always had a love of music, and I'm a little bit on the introverted side myself, and Megan and I shared that in common. And so I think we each had our own unique bond with her, and that's obviously what we miss the most was just kind of the normalcy and the easiness of our relationship. And I think that's what I miss the most of her.
So Megan, I mean, she sounded like such a wonderful and incredible person, and clearly had such an impact on your family's life and the people around her. My understanding is before she died, you had spent a lot of time with her, right? She was with you guys for vacation.
Right. We're actually at our family home with all four of our children and our daughter-in-law, and for about 3 weeks. And we live about 45 minutes from where Megan was renting a home. So we were all there for about 3 weeks, and until the 10th of January when Tim and I went to Florida. I came back to town on the 27th.
Mm.
And yeah, our intention was, and now we wish it had happened in November, but Megan was renting month to month because she was planning on moving to the Sarasota area where we spend some of the winter months.
Right.
And so it was a temporary place for her to live. It was close to her job.
And just to be clear, when you spent that time with her, there was no red flags, nothing that you saw in her life, like she warned about anything, had any kind of trouble, anything that would give you an indication that something like this was about to happen.
I would say everything going on with Megan was per usual, other than she was, struggling with, should I move? Yes, I should move. That kind of thing. Like I said, she'd struggle with change. I wish she had done it in November like planned, but then it was going to be full steam ahead, which is one of the reasons I came back in January to assist her with that.
And Tim and Lynette, to be clear, we did a story on this earlier. We're following up because we wanted the opportunity to speak to you. I think there's confusion right now about where the investigation stands as of today. Where does the investigation stand right now?
Well, right now it's with the Saginaw County Sheriffs. It's still an active homicide. We did, of course, watch Alina's interview, and it did start out with the state police, along with the assistance of the local.
And just to be clear, you're talking about the interview that we did with a forensic expert, Alina Burrows, who we interviewed about this case. Please continue.
Right. So I guess from the new investigative team, the Saginaw County Sheriff's Department, it's still an active homicide investigation.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, going through all the normal protocol, they basically started the case again from scratch when they took it over. There's still DNA that hasn't been tested that we're awaiting results for. Most of the problems or mistakes were made in the beginning with the Michigan State Police, mm-hmm. and many hurdles that we were trying to get through. And, some of those things cannot be erased because they happen so early on in the investigation. And then as time goes on, you lose that luxury of time and sense of urgency. So that, I don't know if that answers your question, but it is still an active investigation.
Right. And so we'll get into what the prior departments did. You mentioned though about how it is in the custody of the Saginaw County Sheriff's Office. Lieutenant Russell Kolb told a media outlet that a CODIS hit was made to one of the DNA samples, which matched another sample, which was submitted from another agency in Michigan. Can you talk to us a little bit more about this?
We can, to the extent that some things have surfaced that cast some doubt about the, the accuracy of that, and that it was most likely more associated with the investigative team and their cleanup of the investigation. In fact, we've been told it's nearly 99% sure that's where that source came from, but that has not been completely released yet.
Yeah, they're still waiting on confirming DNA that would confirm that that's the source. So, of course, that has to be vetted.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because when we were speaking with Alina, we talked about how this could be somehow a break in the case. But just to be clear, Lynette and Tim, you're suggesting that it might not be, a match to a suspect. It might be something else.
That's exactly what we're.
But of course, we're hopeful.
Suspecting.
But we were led to believe not to get too hopeful. And as far as, again, to the crime scene, we now look back and it was so rushed. It feels like within 48 hours, they were telling us that we could go over and clean up the house. And we were like, well, why so soon? And Tim called 3 different times and said, are you sure? And sadly, when we got there, and I guess I'd never had experience like this, I didn't know what to expect. But it was so bad that they had even left the pad where Megan's body fluids were near the front door, laying on the floor for us to find. And I hope no other family ever has to go through that. If somebody just takes time to throw it away. And but we had some concern. Why rush to clean up the crime scene? Are you sure this is such a mess? How could you have possibly gotten everything? But then we did find out there were numerous samples, over 20, and that the majority of those, 15 to 20, were left in Bridgeport. And we didn't discover that until the sheriff took over the case. 10 months later, they went to the local lab in Bridgeport and were shocked to find out all this DNA sitting there that had never been sent or tested. And some of that still has not been tested. I know Alina spoke to the state of the labs in this country, primarily in Michigan, and I think other states. All of our private labs were closed. There used to be up to 40 private labs, and now there are only 2 left in the entire state. And imagine that backlog. And so when they say, you get 3 items at a time, and it's our choosing, it's random. And so the officer sends what he believes are pertinent. Now when we look what was left behind, to us, there's far more pertinent things that need to be tested that would have been our priority, but we're not professionals. And then all of the samples were pulled from our sheriff. We found another lab that the samples were sitting there, and then we discovered that probably wasn't the best lab for our type of case. And so now our samples are at a cold case lab in Texas, and they've started processing them, but some significant items still haven't been tested. So 2 years later.
But the plan is that they are going to be tested and you are going to get the results eventually.
Yes, that is the plan. But we were also told it could be another 1 to 2 years. And imagine this going across the country, which we understand is the case of labs across the country. How many crimes, how many criminals are walking the streets committing new crimes because they can? And I think that that's something that this country needs to take a serious look at.
And I wanted your response to this because you know we talked about in the last episode how this is a situation where they told you at one point they had unknown female DNA at the crime scene. It turns out it was just it was Megan's DNA. They made a mistake. We talked about how the lead detective in the case hadn't visited the crime scene continually because of COVID issues. You mentioned a number of other problems. The Michigan State Police had a statement where they said there was no mishandling of evidence before the case was transferred. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I don't agree with the statement that they made. I understand it's law enforcement and they're going to make statements like that. Back to what Lynette was saying in the beginning, it was kind of a classic case of we didn't know what we didn't know. We didn't think we should be cleaning up the crime scene as soon as they asked us to. We were smart enough to ask about it, and they said, no, we're done. But we've had 2 years to look back on some of the decisions that were made early on that didn't make a lot of sense to us. And then, when we started asking about certain items and articles that were collected at the scene and whether they'd been tested, and we're not getting always the clearest answers about them, it just became more and more confusing. And I think one of the things that Lynette was referring to earlier is when the case was transferred to the Sheriff's Department, the first thing they did was go to our local Bridgeport crime lab, and the tech exact words were, we were waiting for somebody to pick up this.
We didn't understand what happened, why it was all left here.
Indicating that it had been left unattended to for the last 9 to 10 months. That's not part of the normal waiting process. That's a mistake. we were prepared to be part of the normal waiting process that we've heard is, 6 months, 12 months, a year, whatever it might be. That was an egregious error. So then at that point, we then became part of that waiting process. But I look back to some of the explanations that we were given that, well, they can only test so many articles at once. There's this big backlog, blah, blah, blah. Well, none of that was true because it had never been forwarded from its initial staging place, if you will. So again, we've had nothing but time to kind of look back and wish things would have been done differently in the beginning.
Well, why do you think this happened? Why do you think that they did this?
You know what?
It was personal to our detective in a lot of ways. He always had an excuse why he hadn't come to Saginaw to talk to X, Y, or Z, why he hadn't checked local things. I'm in training this week, or he was in training a lot. And then I don't know how many weeks into the case, he got a promotion, and you could clearly see he was done with our case.
Right.
He mentally checked out. He just wasn't that engaged. And sadly, then of course, we found out that two very pertinent cameras in the neighborhood that would have caught everything. They were directed, swept her front lawn, were never checked, and you can't resuscitate those memory cards. They're overwritten.
Yeah.
And then we found out numerous neighbors why were we never questioned? But then part of the problem was within less than 24 hours of we finding Megan, the local police put out a statement to the neighborhood to calm their fears, saying, basically, there's no forced entry,
right,
and there's no gun, and trying to calm the neighborhood. And my fear has always been, well, did that also muzzle them because they think, oh, the police have this.
Yeah,
they know what's going on. There will be an arrest, and we don't need to come forward with any
which is a legitimate concern, that could happen. And we did the case last week. Still, the sentiment we got was people were so frustrated by it and a lack of this explanation. And I really appreciate you coming on to give kind of this perspective on it for people and kind of give like a window to what's might be happening in other cases across the country. I wish we had a little bit more time to talk about this. You have an open door. Anytime you want to come back to talk about what the developments are in the case, please do. I'm just going to tell our viewers and our listeners that if they have any information, they can contact the Saginaw County Sheriff's Office hotline at 989-790-5423, Crime Stoppers at 1-800-422-JAIL. Listen, Tim and Lynette, again, I wish we had a little bit more time, but I really appreciate you coming on, talking about Megan, talking about the lapses in this investigation and where it currently stands. And I just wish you both the best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So it was great speaking to the Drumhillers, but unfortunately we ran out of time and there was a lot more I wanted to ask them. Having said that, they had some additional information that I wanted to share with all of you. So this is what they told us after the interview. First of all, the front door of Megan's home doesn't have side windows, only this window at the top at approximately 6.5 to 7 feet high. An officer actually had to step on a box to peek in, at which point he could only see her hand that was visible. Now, Megan's blackout curtains were closed, and she was extremely cautious, and they believed that she would never let a stranger in. There were no signs of forced entry, and the doors and the windows were locked. She was strangled with her purse straps and found near the front door. When our guest, Alina Burrows, referred to strangulation as a crime of passion, this is what they and the police feel is what likely occurred here. Now, moreover, when the police made statements to the neighbors and public that this was not a random crime, not a random break-in, they were given the impression that there would be a quick resolution in the case. And then phone records show Megan's communication patterns, and this includes daily and regular correspondence with a person that abruptly ended the afternoon she's presumed to have been killed days prior to the day that she was ultimately found. Now, again, that is some information, additional information from the Drumhillers. I'd like to stay on the story as much as we can as it develops. Again, I offered the Drumhillers an open forum to discuss this case if there should be any developments, because if anyone needs answers and deserves answers, it's them. That's all we have for you here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, and please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.